Hey everybody, welcome to another session on external DNS. So this project is really cool for us. We've saved a lot of time on automation and manual entries. And joining me today is Amit. Amit, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hey folks, I'm Amit DSouza. I'm co-founder of Odyssey Cloud, and I help my clients better implement Kubernetes solutions. Today, as Brad mentioned, we are walking through external DNSs, which has helped countless of our clients.
And maybe before your life with external DNS, would you maybe want to share how you used to do things in terms of DNS entries?
Yes, back in the days when we had to go and enter DNS entries, it was all manual, or we already had to know exactly what URL we are going to use and go and put them in Terraform if people wanted to put them in Terraform. So it was quite either manual or we had to pre-plan everything way back in the day when you might not really have URLs in place, etc. Versus now, it pretty much takes no time to set up a whole thing. None of it is manual. All you have to do is set up your Kubernetes Ingress. That's it.
And I guess it gives you more time to spend on innovation opposed to doing tickets. A ticket comes through, you've got to add this entry. You've got to be accountable for it. So it's good that you can also move it to the developers' hands as well, where they can start taking care of their own entries, and especially if you're doing like domain-driven design where the teams want to go and just be able to handle all of their code all through. So yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
And did you have some slides you want to share today, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So let me start sharing my screen.
And how long have you been working with this for? About 2 years now, probably, eh?
Yeah, close to 2 years now,
Yeah.
where we've been using our entire external DNS and Kubernetes setups,
Mm.
where we constantly try and find better ways and more automated ways of doing things.
Yep.
It also helps us move to a higher level of maturity because, for example, when you do have GitOps and all in place, you have to ensure that your software product is at a high level of maturity. You already have finished testing the product before it goes and gets deployed, etc. So it does help us be better software engineers as well.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, if you want to go into presentation mode, we can get started.
Yes.
You can on the top right corner, you can see present.
My bad.
Yeah, that's all good.
So welcome folks to the external DNS talk. Today, we are going to walk over the need for external DNS, approximate overview of what external DNS is, and then introduction to external DNS. And then at the end, we're going to do a Q&A. So why external DNS and from where it is inspired? External DNS is basically inspired from kubedns, which manages the internal DNS of Kubernetes. And a lot of people realize that we do not have anything to go into different DNS, public DNS providers and go and create all these DNS records. And that caused people in the open source world to jump together and try and find the best solution we could, which would pretty much help anyone, whether you're working on AWS, you're working on GCP, you're working on Cloudflare. You can pretty much leverage external DNS within Kubernetes to automatically create your DNS records. So if you have a service or an ingress, service of type load balancer, an external name or ingress, you can go and automatically create your DNS record. External DNS will detect all of it for you. So the next part is actual external DNS. What does it do? So external DNS allows you to manage your DNS records dynamically, and what you're using is specifically Ingress services. These are just some of the cloud providers that help you create your DNS records. So if you're using Azure, you're using GCP, you're using AWS, it doesn't really matter. You can use any of them. And what if you're using Cloudflare to just manage your caching, etc.? You can use that too.
And can you just go back quickly? I just wanted to point one thing out. So let's say that you have a GKE cluster in Google Cloud. You can actually still use AWS Route 53 if you want. You don't actually have, just because you're using one cloud like AWS or a cluster, you can use your external DNS from anywhere. So an example of that is we use GCP, but at the time the domain was cheaper for us in AWS. So therefore we purchased the domain name in Route 53 and then we associate it with our GKE cluster as well. So you're not locked in by the cloud that you're in. You can use, the external DNS provider from anywhere that you like to.
Absolutely. As you mentioned earlier, right? And the question is, how does external DNS know that it's made an entry? How do I know that, this is a particular entry I've made and this is the entry I can continue to modify? So, and in a safe way. Because the last thing you want external DNS is to do that someone went and made a manual entry where pointed it to a different server and you have gone and ended up updating that entry. Like that is a serious no-no for us, right? So that is how external DNS jumps in. It uses TXT records. So whenever it goes into your Route 53 or your Cloud DNS in Google, it ensures it creates a TXT record for any changes it makes. That way it knows that I have the authority to this particular domain name, and it puts it as to heritage is external DNS, so it knows that it can continue to control it. If there is no record called argocd.odysseycloud.io, then it can go and create a record. But if there is a pre-existing manual record that has been created, it is not going to change it. So you will manually have to go and delete that record. Only then will external DNS take over. And there's a very good reason for that, because there are quite a few times people end up putting manual records and pointing it to a completely different IP address. For example, if you created a public IP specifically for a particular domain name, etc., and you have gone and pointed it to there. One of the examples is for one of my clients, we have an Apache server which then goes and points to all our DNS records. So we have multiple DNS records for the same domain name, and one of those domain names, they actually have IP address. They have a proper Apache server which redirects back to a different domain name, etc. And when you want to do all those things, you don't want external DNS to go and overwrite these records. You want to ensure that it's only if it has been done manually until the individuals decide, yes, we want to automate this whole process, only then should external DNS take over. Now, how does external DNS make these changes, right? Because as Brad mentioned 2 minutes ago, that even though we have our GK cluster in Google, but we are making changes in AWS. So no matter which cloud provider you're using, you need IAM role. If it's not an IAM role, like in Cloudflare, there is no concept of IAM roles. You need to generate an API key, etc. And apart from that, you need to deploy your external DNS using a Helm chart or manifest or customize into Kubernetes. So Brad, how have y'all implemented it in your domain, external DNS? Do you all use the same cloud provider?
Yeah, I guess I've used it a few times in different projects. So the first one, probably like a year and a half ago. I think you've seen this as well, where we use Cloudflare and AKS. So
Yes.
I found that Cloudflare was actually probably my favorite one to work with because it worked really easy. So I remember when we started off using this project, we had to go into Cloudflare. We made the API key that was least privilege. It was specific to that domain, and then we would have to add the secret in Kubernetes when we're installing DNS. So maybe today we can go over a little bit of the installation of this, getting started as well. And so we used an Azure AKS cluster, Cloudflare as external DNS, and it worked really well. And then I guess the other project that we did was the GKE cluster with AWS Route 53. That
Yeah.
worked really well also. And then it was interesting when we went to try multi-region, wasn't it? Because we 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 found that you couldn't do the multi-region cluster with two external DNSs because they're trying to take over each other. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So if you're pointing into the same domain, it gets more complicated, right? If external DNS is trying to fix the same records,
yeah,
different ones. The funny thing is, as we showed in the previous one, it kind of realizes that the heritage was external DNS. So you will definitely have to ensure that this is completely different heritage. And say, normally you tend to use the Helm charts in different Kubernetes setups using the same configuration. And in that case, the heritage would pretty much show as the same thing, right? It would still show as external DNS, owner, default, etc. So it can easily confuse the respective external DNS in your setup, that, oh, I own this record, no, I own this record, no, I own this record, kind of thing. So you would have to go and update all those additional TXT records or how they are supposed to get displayed in order to ensure that, yes, it doesn't overwrite each other. So one thing I would like to mention though, we did mention about cross cloud setups where you have to go and create a secret. But if you do decide to create it within the same cloud setup, you do not necessarily have to create a secret. You can automatically manage it using RBAC roles, etc., where it automatically gets permissions. Since it's basically like providing IAM roles to a particular server or a VM in AWS, etc., where you give that particular server an instance role and give that instance particular permissions. So you can always leverage that as well for external DNS if you're within the same DNS provider.
yeah,
Where
and that would be best practice to use that as well with that role. Yeah,
Yeah, if you are in the same provider, definitely that's the best practice.
it's a nice clean solution. You don't have to worry about entering your secrets and stuff, and it gives you the least privilege, which is
Yeah,
really good.
I totally agree. The lesser secrets you need to manage within Kubernetes, the better or cleaner it is. It's the same reason why all different websites are moving away from creating their own passwords, and they are moving towards, let's leverage Google, let's leverage Microsoft, who have already implemented the best practices. So to begin with, we are going to start off with Route 53. And this is how you need to set it up in Route 53. You have two components. One is your IAM role, which you need to set up. And once you set up that IAM role, you need to deploy your Helm chart for external DNS AWS. The policy is sync. It doesn't necessarily have to be sync. You also have the option of update only. If you do use update, then it will only update records. It will not delete records. So if there is a pre-existing record via uh, external DNS as well, it won't delete the record. For deletion, you'll still have to do that manually. But sync, on the other hand, it will update, delete, create records. It will pretty much do everything. This is important. You want to have the registry as txt, and that helps you better identify your records which external DNS created, whether you're trying to identify it manually or external DNS needs to identify it for itself. And the extra env is basically an easy way of providing your AWS or Azure secrets extra, etc. So here I have provided my AWS credentials using a secret called AWS DNS creds. This is the key. So you provide these details, and based on these, it understands that, okay, you're using Route 53. Along with that, the reason it understands is you're provided the provider AWS, and you mention the domain filter you want, and it will go ahead and make any changes on that specific domain only. If you have not entered the domain filter, it's not going to make a change on that respective domain. And that's again for very good reason. They don't want you to make unintentional changes. So if you do not want to make change to a domain, but you ended up putting it in an ingress record, it doesn't want to go and make those changes, and then later you figure out and realize, oh, that was a mistake. I do not want to make a change on, say, this is example.com, but say I do not want to make a change on zebra.com. And one of my ingresses had, I don't know, gk.zebra.com, and it went and made a change on that. You do not want that. So that's why you have domain filters.
That's like that double protection. So if you don't do the least privilege in the cloud level, then this will protect you here as well.
Yeah. And basically what this is doing is your IAM role allows your respective records to DNS admin roles, and it goes ahead and then can make changes on those respective DNS. So here, for example, it's not DNS admin. It is very explicit records, least privileged permissions. But in certain other ones, you might have to give it slightly higher permissions. So then we talk about Azure. So Azure has the concept of service principal instead. It doesn't use the same kind of IAM. Well, it uses the same kind of IAM, but the way it manages its user and password is different. So here we have to put in a service principal as a secret, and you put in your entire JSON file into this so that it goes ahead and can go and update, create the records, etc. Again, in order for you to have permissions to do this, it needs to have permissions within Azure itself. So you need to have AZ role, and you put yourself as a contributor to the DNS zone, and then it allows external DNS to make these changes. As Brad mentioned before, what if you want to mix and match? You create your, say, Azure DNS. You can create this particular thing for your provider Azure, and you can create this particular provider within AWS. All you need to do is provide the secret name, and within Azure, you need to ensure that that particular credentials or service principal has access to the DNS zone itself. So again, going back to GCP, it's similar. You provide the service account credentials, the domain filters, the text domains. You ensure you provide your service account permissions, and that service account would need DNS admin permissions in this case. Cloudflare, as Brad mentioned, is one of the most straightforward ones. You don't need to create complicated roles, etc. You can generate an API token for your respective user that will provide you with an API key and an API email. You then go ahead and mention that as secret name, API key, pointed to the secret which has those API keys, email, and that's about it. So this is on a high level how to manage your entire DNS records. Now I will also show you all reference to the setup itself. So this is gone under Kubernetes SIG itself. And now if you all want to access any of these respective repositories, you all should go ahead, check it out. They provide extensive documentation on how you can use these. And you might have some edge cases, which it can also take care of. Again, going back to the part about open source, the best way to leverage open source is if you do run into a bug, try and jump in to fix it yourself. If it's an easy problem, if it's more difficult, the community comes together to better improve that solution and fix the bugs. So as you can see, they provide you exact step-by-step how to run it locally, how to run it on any of these respective providers, DNS public domains, and how to go ahead with it. Now,
And if there's a provider that's not there, like feel free to submit an issue, and I'm sure someone will do that in the future.
yeah, or you could always implement a provider yourself if you decide that, you know what, I want to get actively involved in the open source setup, and let's go ahead. So the next part I would like to cover is the actual how we make these changes. So this is, for example, I'll show you first the Helm chart, which I used to use for it. What we have done is I'm leveraging Argo CD in order to make any of these changes. I prefer to use Argo CD everywhere because it helps me ensure that my code and testing has happened prior to Argo taking over. So the first thing I do is I mention what is the Helm chart. You mention the repository. You mention where to pick the values from. What are the chart versions? And once all those are mentioned, you then go ahead and implement them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you need multiple YAML files to go ahead with this integration. And as I showed you all in the slides, you have to provide your policies, your RBAC. So you always have to say, go and create the RBAC so that it has permissions to make any of these changes. And registry can be TXT records, so it can go ahead and create these TXT records. I then go ahead and provide any stuff I want, which is my credentials and domain filters, etc., so that it can go ahead and make any of these changes. Now you notice that this is a Helm chart. You don't always necessarily need to provide that. You can also go ahead and use your own setup via customize, which is what I have done here. I currently have migrated my Helm charts to customize, and I'm using a combination of customize with Helm charts in this particular fashion, where I'm using the customization.yaml, but I'm integrating and implementing it as a Helm chart. Now, you would think, why do you need to do this? Well, because some of the times you will notice that this is not specific to external DNS, but say, for example, I am using Cert Manager, and after I finish implementing the Helm chart, I also need a cluster issuer. Now, rather than creating a cluster issuer afterwards in a manual step, or even as you would have to put in a kubectl apply within your CI pipeline, if you can implement that during your first step itself, that is the best case scenario, which is what Customize helps you leverage and deploy. So now I can pretty much deploy my cluster issuer. At the same time, I'm deploying my certificate manager, or in our case, right now, external DNS. External DNS doesn't require me to deploy anything additional, but say if you want to create any specific entries for any of your other softwares, that's where you will leverage customize.
Yeah, that's a nice next solution. And for those starting off that, maybe Argo and Helm is a little bit scary, can we show them on the documentation here how to get started with, just a couple of lines with kubectl?
Absolutely. So this is the straightforward documentation for external DNS on AWS, where they tell you exactly what changes you need to make. So go and create this IAM policy and role. Once that is done, then go ahead and it mentions to you, do not use EC2 roles, but create RBAC policies instead. It then tells you to create the Route 53 records. So these are simplifying it step by step as to what exactly you need to do in order to set up your environment. And then it gives you an actual manifest file, which is as simple as kubectl apply, copy this manifest, paste this manifest into your setup, and go crazy. The other thing is it gives you an option without RBAC or with RBAC. I would generally always recommend go for with RBAC. It gives more fine-grained and fine-tuned solutions and helps you to ensure that you only give your respective external DNS very specific least privileged roles that you want. So you can see how they're given the DNS view and updater permissions on the cluster level. Here they have done the role binding, and then they implement external DNS using a manifest file. We have used Helm, but you don't need to. So this is if you want to apply the manifest directly. As I mentioned earlier, there is an option of upsert only. And what this does is it doesn't allow external DNS to delete records. It only allows it to create records and update records.
And for the folks that are new to Helm, we can probably do another session where we can make a Helm chart, leverage a Helm chart for external DNS and Cert Manager as well.
Yes, I actually, the funny thing is I was just chatting with an ex-colleague the other day, and he's trying to get into Kubernetes, and he was like, how do I leverage Helm? Can you explain Helm better to me? So I think there's definitely a use case where we can have a long conversation on just Helm. What is Helm? How do we use Helm in Kubernetes? And why do we use it?
Yeah, it sounds perfect. Yeah, that will help a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. So as you can see, you can provide every single thing here. Now, this is an important thing which they have mentioned here. So if you do not specify this, automatically it picks up more than just Ingress. So if you specify Ingress, so as I mentioned earlier, right, you can even use services like load balancer and external name. But if you explicitly specify the source as Ingress, it will not allow services to create a new record. It will only allow Ingress to create a new record. So definitely keep this in mind. So if I omit this line, it will only allow Ingresses to use it. If I keep both of them, then it's perfect. You have a service, you have an Ingress. It spins up a new domain within your favorite DNS provider. The other thing I would recommend is if you have multiple DNS providers you want to make changes to, like we have had times where we want to make changes to Cloudflare and AWS. In that case, you got to play around with your domain filters as well as your DNS providers. I, in my scenario, create separate DNS providers. For example, I have an external DNS AWS, I have an external DNS Cloudflare, I have an external DNS Azure. Now, in this scenario, the domains which are deployed on AWS, I can do that just using the external DNS AWS. And the way you manage them is you just mention those respective domains in your domain filter. It's an array. It's a list, so you can mention multiple such domains within it. And say, for example, I mention abc.com, def.com for AWS, and xyz.com, utw for Azure. So if I mention that explicitly, the respective external DNSs of AWS and Azure will take over those respective domains only.
Yeah, that was a good call out, actually. Yeah.
Yes. You will, one thing that, so depending on the individual, you might want to make certain annotations within your respective external DNS ingress. It's not compulsory, it's not required, but you can use this. So this, as they are mentioned, right? If you want to give multiple names to a service, you can set external DNS alpha host name and give multiple names. But say there are times I declare multiple URLs in one single ingress, and I only want one of them to be created as a record. The rest of them are maybe for internal, maybe I've just created for future purpose, but I do not want external DNS to currently create a record. In such a scenario, if those domain names are already present within your filter service, but you don't want external DNS to create the record, you can explicitly put in this annotation, and it will only create a record for this specific domain, even though you have 5 more domains within your respective ingress or service. So Brad, in your case, have you ever had a scenario where you have created, like, say, multiple domains within a specific ingress?
I haven't actually, no, not yet. But I guess one thing I did get caught out on was the domain filter not doing it properly, and then that, took me a couple hours to figure out, oh, that's my actual problem, why it's not working.
Yeah.
But generally, so far, it's just been one ingress per subdomain or host. But yeah, it's interesting to see more.
Yeah. So I have currently written an ingress file which can. So generally in the past, you will notice that we only use one ingress within one domain name, right? So I have basically managed to modify a Helm chart to have multiple URLs within one single domain. And in order to do that, I think both of us worked on this task together, if you remember,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
we modified this and created a range of ingresses. And the advantage of doing this is, now what I've done is, all domains which are specific to AWS, I can dump all of them to one single setup. And this only external DNS of AWS will take care of these. And then I will have a separate one where external DNS of a different domain will take care of that respective annotation. It makes the whole process easier in the long run if you consolidate them by AWS DNSs will be in Ingress A. So one of the things I've done is I've created Ingress-AWS, Ingress-GCP, Ingress-Cloudflare, and so on and so forth. You will find that this is going to be very useful to you in the long run, where you understand how to just iterate through a range in order to have. So instead of this, I can have multiple of these, where I call this Ingress-GCP, and so on and so forth. And my Helm chart will go through all of them and iterate through all of them. It simplifies DNS for us.
nice.
Okay. Sorry.
And if anyone has any questions as we go, please feel free to ask them.
Give me a second. I'm trying to pull up my setup again. So probably the last part in the setup I would like to refer is these two domains. So I'm just going to ping them in the chat. How do we publish this, Brad? Do we just paste it in the chat?
Yeah, I can publish it later to the channel actually, so that's fine. I can put it in
Okay,
the
sweet.
description.
So
Yeah,
that's perfect. So that way Brad can roll this out where we show external DNS. We have provided you the Kubernetes SIG as well as the Helm chart for the same, and you could choose to use either of them. Um, if you are not new to Helm charts and you're already aware of how to use them, then go into Artifact Hub, and Artifact Hub has all the Helm charts that you require. It's like how it's like your Docker repository for Helm charts.
very cool website project.
And here you will find external DNS by Bitnami. Bitnami is a trusted one, and you can go ahead and use the Bitnami one. It already provides out-of-the-box support for all these different ones, where you do not need to paste your manifest file. You only need to provide your configuration that you require. So if you're not new to Helm charts, feel free to check this out and leverage this to implement external DNS.
Yeah, it's very easy, isn't it? It's the beauty of it. Someone sort of almost does the work for you, and you just specify your values and you're away.
Absolutely. Like this is all you need to do. You add the repository to your setup, then install it. Obviously, if you want to change your values, you also say a -f and values, provide your values file. But that is very straightforward, and that's nearly as simple as kubectl -f and the file name.
And if anyone needs any help with this, we're on the CNCF Slack channel, so just reach out in a private message there, and we're happy to help you.
Yes. Thanks a lot, everyone, and it was great doing this session.
Thanks for coming over. It was awesome.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.